Thanks everyone for the invite, and hello again. I know quite a few of you before over the side. Yes, words of wisdom, I'm not too sure. My role, water. Nobody wants to talk about water, so we bypass that one pretty quickly. As has just been announced today, I've also taken on the role of the role basically the PIP job, stepped away from around drought, and so I'm now going to be dealing with a lot of the drought stuff in New South Wales. Quite a bit of that stuff will be dealing with, I think the role that PIP's had over time has been engaging at a local level on an individual basis. Some of the work that I'll be doing as they go into what they call the second phase will be dealing with a lot of the policy stuff from here on. So there's a lot of discussions at the moment around establishing a national drought policy, and there's been discussions in that, and I think the state government have been and want to continue to get actively involved in that space, so they've asked me to just give them a hand through that process. Not necessarily dealing with the day-to-day stuff, because a lot of that, there are agencies that are in place in the state at the moment around the rural resilience people, the Rural Assistance Authority, the local land services, the rural financial councils. All those things are well and truly established within the state. In many cases aren't used properly, but are certainly established within the state. So what we'll be doing is encouraging people to use those agencies and really making them work and deliver outcomes. So in my role, what I've got at the moment is not too much on, so it's a pretty simple job. So at the moment, I chair the Narrabri CCC, which is for the Narrabri Gas Project. A lot of water issues and discussions around that project. I chair the Intensive Agricultural Committee, of which Sean occasionally turns up to, even though it's a very important issue for you fellas. And I've been doing a fair bit of work out around Broken Hill, around the pipeline and the Menindee Lakes. So if you really want to see tensions within a community around an issue, go to the Menindee Lakes. And if you really want to see tension or the impact of the drought, you want to go out, as I've done, basically from the west of the state's ratchet, quite frankly, and even where I am at Walga is an absolute bloody mess. We've had 14 inches of rainfall, a 34-inch rainfall area. We've had 14 inches for the year, which is as bad as it's ever been. That's in high, very reliable, actually, high rainfall country. So I thought I was bad until I went to Broken Hill and came back in a lot of that country in there, and it is surprisingly bad. And I think if any of you really want to have an experience, you should jump in the car and go out there and have a look, because it's absolutely amazing what you see out there at the moment. It's just staggering how bad, and those blokes actually surviving out in that environment is just incredible. I think the Menindee Lakes are down, there's not all that much water left. They've still got to maintain some water there for the Broken Hill supply until the new pipeline comes on, and that'll be sort of early next year. Once it comes on, I think they can draw out of the Murray, and there won't be much water left in the Menindee Lake system itself. There'll still be some water there, but there's basically been no flows into the Menindee Lakes in the last 12 months, and that's just how bad the system is. It is as dry as buggery out there right up through Queensland. So they're talking about a change coming through next week, and hopefully some of that northern stuff, maybe out of that cyclone coming back down, if it gets into the basin, that'd be a very, very good thing, because it's pretty ordinary out there at the moment. So in doing a lot of that work, and it's been a lot of that work's been overlapping with the stuff that I've been doing with the drought stuff anyway, talking to a lot of farmers in regard to the drought issues. There's just a few things that I wanted to go through on. The Intensive Agriculture Committee, can I say that it's really important that you as an industry actually get involved in that process, because there is, you know better than I do, continual pressure in all areas that you're working in at the moment, from urban sprawl to a certain extent. People challenging our agricultural practices have been doing for a long period of time, but I think we're starting to see more and more focus on that at the moment from a varying range of people. Issues around, challenging our animal welfare practices, because they're not used to and they don't know what it is. So I think the Intensive Ag Committee is really important. First of all, about understanding how we're going to deal with the connectivity between urban development, urban sprawl, and allow the development of the industries to go ahead, and especially in the areas where they're really starting to get some of that urban development. I think the Sydney Basin is probably the biggest area for that. Once you get out of the Sydney Basin, you get up onto the North Coast. I know there'll be issues up there. Certainly the blueberry issues up there are creating enormous problems. They're not. You go up and solve them for me, Terry. So that, and that's a combination of a lot of things. It's a combination of water. It's a visual aspect. I mean, who would have thought years ago that that blueberries would be causing contention in a community. I mean, the livestock industry, you'd expect that sort of thing because we've grown up with that. But actually, when you're starting talking about horticultural industries and you're hitting a contentious area there, then there's a real issue with. I suppose at times you've got to ask the question where the community are and where their values and where their standards and what do they actually require of agriculture and the agricultural industry as a whole. And I think that's the real challenge. So the Intensive Agriculture Committee, I think, is important because we need to make sure we continue to raise the issues with the government that are creating contention. So in the Sydney Basin, for instance, one of the biggest things in the Sydney Basin is John Cordina, Pepe's Ducks, those fellas. And it's not necessarily, I've been out to their factory, it's not necessarily the factory that's creating problems. They've got some very good neighbours there and they don't have an issue. The issue is that all of the sheds that are providing chooks and ducks into the facility are gradually getting squeezed out by the development that's going on. So the question is, does the state government want to maintain those industries or not maintain the industries? And if they do want to maintain them, how do they do it? What protection do they provide? And that also goes the same with the dairy industry, in there and outside there. Now, the reason I say that is that when I was the president of New South Wales Farmers, we had a problem at Cowra with the dairy industry and a neighbour. So this was ongoing 10 years ago, right? And we were asked to intervene in that one, which I couldn't do because providing everybody was meeting their legal obligations, it's not up to me to sit down and make a judgment against one party as against another party how to do that. So this can happen anywhere. It doesn't just necessarily need to be on the more intense areas. And that was actually a fair way out of town. That wasn't even local to town. That was actually a fair way out of town. That one. So it's nothing new. And that's when you get to the stage where you've got farmer against farmer, I think we run into some problems because the debate changes. If we have city communities or town folk against farmers, that sort of conflict to a certain extent is expected. But farmer against farmer, it's not expected. And I think that's where we tend to undermine our strength because all of a sudden we're fighting amongst ourselves on some of those issues. It also goes back to the water debate, where we are now seeing people who actually have the capacity to irrigate being very much challenged by the people who are dry land farmers. And you're seeing that out on the Darling River, for instance, where Darling River's dry. The argument is that it's dry because cotton extraction up north and north of Bourke and mismanagement of the system and water sharing plans and everything's not worked out. Now what's happening is that's then challenging the broader community around the water use debate and what's fair and reasonable and how do you deal with drought situations and how do you make sure that you've got equity up and down the system. So from everybody in the room that's using water to one extent or another, you need to be aware of that debate and make sure that it doesn't get out of hand on you. Because if it does, it's always very difficult to pull the debate back. So you need to be engaged in the debate. You need to show how those water sharing plans are working. You need to show how as an industry you're efficient and how you're getting more efficiencies all the time. And if you don't engage the community in that debate, then it gets way out of hand and all of a sudden trying to pull it back is impossible. And I think you can see that in that live export debate, exactly what's happened at the moment, right? When the cattle job came on, we got that trade up and going again. Joe Laurie got that trade up and going again in 6 weeks. This sheep debate, they didn't get involved in the debate. The industry sat back to a certain extent and let it go. All of a sudden, I think you'll find that it's in serious trouble of continuing if the government changes at the next election. I think they only just lost the debate by one yesterday as it was put into the House, so I think the independents. So that just shows, that industry's on a knife edge now because the industry probably didn't really actively engage in that debate. So all I say is that the water debate, be conscious about it. I can tell you now that there's a lot of people questioning water use, where water should be used, in which industries it should be used, which is the most efficient way to use the water. Are the water sharing plans right? Are they set right? How do we manage the droughts? How do we make sure we get equity in the system? And that's coming from people who are down the river system and losing their riparian rights against people who are actually extracting water. So you just need to be very conscious about that debate and have a think about how you do it. I think the industry, broader industry as a whole, needs to find better ways to engage the community in that debate because if you don't, you've got a problem. Now, an example of that would be right now, so I live Broken Hill, Darling River's just about Ratchet. We're all of a sudden dropping water out of Split Rock Dam into Keepit Dam to supply water to Upper Namoy because they are quite rightly customers, but this is a time when there's no water in the system. Irrigators are actually getting water coming down through the system and being provided to them. So they need to actually go out and explain to the community how the system works, why that's fair, why they've managed their water well. But that's not the debate. The debate in the community is, how in the hell are they irrigating when there's no water in the system? How's that fair? So you don't want to be in that position because, as I say, it takes a hell of a lot to recover that if you do get into that position. So the water and water use thing is one of the more contentious things I'm seeing at the moment across all the industries. And as an agricultural industry, how do we actually manage that? Not manage it, but make sure that we are really proactively involved in it. How do we get the right messages out there? And I think this is up to the industry, not only the dairy industry, the rice industry, cotton industry, all the industries to sit down and say, gee, we need to have another think about how we engage in the community on this. Think about 20 years ago, I mentioned this many times before, the cotton industry were in a fair bit of trouble about being environmental vandals, about water use and about chemical use. And they put in place at that stage the best management practice. They did some television advertising and they turned that industry around completely, whereas now people accept the cotton industry and accept that they're actually doing the job environmentally in an environmentally sustainable fashion. And I think in some of the issues around water, the one thing that's really becoming contentious at the moment, you need to have a think about how you get in that debate, step into it and find a way to engage, or have at least have a think, sit down and have a think. How do we actually need to do anything here? Do we need to actually sit down and have a bit of a process about engaging the community in a broader debate to make sure that we don't get caught short on that, so that's on those. That drought stuff, basically, as I said before, I'll be dealing with those structures are already in place. I'll be dealing with a lot of other policy stuff, and obviously you fellas have got some thoughts about how the drought stuff should be dealt with, what your views on that are. You need to have a bit of a think about some of those policy areas. There's a lot of discussions going on at a national level at the moment. I think they're being driven out of the Prime Minister's office, and I think that they'd love to get to some settings on long-term drought policy. So, I think it's important that you get some of those views back into myself and others about, anything you think that could be an advantage or not. I think this drought has really tested everybody. I think it's broken a whole heap of records. The good thing from the livestock sector, from my point of view, is that we've been able to sell a lot of stock and still get value for them, which we haven't in previous droughts. So even though I think this drought's the worst I've ever come across in my time, in actual fact we've had a market to trade into, which has been very important. The wool market's also been very good. Doesn't happen often, but it has been this year, thank God. I think from the grain point of view, it's creating multiple issues. So you've got, on the Liverpool Plains, no winter crop, no summer crop at the moment. And unless there's very good rain comes through next week, they're starting to run out of a window for summer crop. They've got to go back into a winter crop. That'll be the first time they've ever missed 2 crops in a row. Grain supply, apart from a little bit down through the Eyre Peninsula and Western Australia, is pretty tight. There's a bit down through southern New South Wales and Victoria, but not a lot. And so the impact on anyone who's feeding grain on a regular basis, their stock, being mainly you blokes, could potentially be pretty devastating. So I know a lot of the grain that we've had to buy this year just for our stock, about $450 a tonne landed at home or more, quoted higher than that in some cases, all depending right at the end of the season. So, and there hasn't been much barley stripped in a lot of the area either. So they tell me there's not a lot of that around. There's going to be virtually no sorghum stripped. From what they might get some in Queensland, I don't know. So from any grain users at the moment, there's a real challenge as to how we deal with that longer term. But if you've got any ideas on the drought stuff, Sean, make sure that we get them up. I've the first meeting on Friday at a national level, and I don't know.
Roof will be representing Dairy Connect.
Right. So I don't know at this stage. I've got some documents that sent me, and I've had a bit of a read of them. From a bit of a historic point of view, I was the NFF president when they dismantled the exceptional circumstance package, and basically the argument was there that the exceptional circumstances were their interest rate subsidies there. Interest rate subsidies reached 23% of people. So there's only 23% of people actually got any benefit out of the interest rate subsidies. So the argument from both houses, both sides of Parliament was, if 70% of people can survive a drought without any assistance, why can't the other 23% survive a drought? What are they doing that's different? Or is it just their business structure that's allowing them to access interest rate subsidies or whatever? And so once the interest rate subsidies were removed, and they put in place the drought preparedness measures, and a lot of those have actually helped people get through this for this period, there's no doubt about that. There's obviously a lot more work to be done, but the length of this drought has created the real issue. So the problem was that there was neither side of the House wanted to continue on with the exceptional circumstances because it was a huge amount of money that was being invested, but it was only hitting a small target and it wasn't addressing all the issues. So it's a matter of how we do that, how we deal with that long term. No government wants to go back to that process. It's all about trying to get people sort of lined up and ready to go beforehand, so you don't have to worry about that. And what programs obviously can be put in place. And obviously I would have thought what tax initiatives could be put in place. There's already quite a few there, but what other tax initiatives could be put in place, whether there's any opportunities there, I think we need to obviously sit down and have a bit of a look at. Because when you're talking longer term, you need to make sure you've got all those things covered off. Can I say, as we move on to the soya milk debate, good to see the response. Good to see the response. I spoke to Buddy Sean about this when he wanted to call it nut juice. I spoke to Sean about this bloody ages ago. I find it interesting that the industries, agriculture, as a whole, haven't seen this as a threat. Right? So the milk debate has been going for a while, and I congratulate you on taking it on, because somebody needed to take it on. MLA now is sitting back and having a look at all this false meat coming in and think, Jesus, gets back to what I was talking about, the water. We're getting caught out because we're not proactively thinking about these things. But I've got to tell you, Sean and I had these discussions probably 18 months ago, and I suggested that he get into MLA and talk to MLA to try and get them to work with it too, because there's a threat in that industry, but nothing happens. That's the frustrating part about what we do at times. Nothing happens. But you've actually made some ground on the milk stuff, I believe. Truth in labelling, I think, is a very, very important component of protecting our image. And there's, I think a lot of the production, especially in the beef side, the production is not going to come from another agriculture product. It'll be coming out of something that'll be completely different. So to be able to utilise our good, clean image, and that's the only reason they want to call it meat, because meat itself has got a good, clean image as milk has. That's the reason they want to use it. That's the reason we have to protect it, because it is a very important thing. It's a very important part of what we sell. And attached to those products are genuine security, all the clean green image, everything that we've built up over a period of time, our management systems, and somebody else is just hijacking that and taking that out and using it. And I think that we should be absolutely doggedly protecting that. And I know that it's happening around the world in some parts, but I do congratulate you, because it needed to be debated in Australia, and I've been surprised at how some of the agencies have just sat back and let this debate roll on, because I don't think it can. I think it's a very, very dangerous thing. It's not only for the milk, and I think the milk fella's got away on it a bit, but potentially where it's going to happen with beef, where it's going to happen with everything. I actually sit on the AWI board, and one of the things that the wool industry has is the Woolmark brand. And the Woolmark brand is about protecting wool and the image of wool and what is actually sold under the Woolmark brand. So we regularly have got a team of lawyers working. So anybody around the world that actually sells anything with the Woolmark brand has to be able to show that it is actually wool. And if it's not, then we hit them with the lawyers straight away. Go into them and make them remove the brand or whatever, because they're using our brand to sell their product. So that's how we're dealing within the wool industry. And I find it interesting in the other industries. There's probably a lot to lose in the meat industry, a huge amount to lose in the meat industry. And so it's absolutely critical that fight keeps going. And I think you probably started in Australia. It needs to happen. And I think internationally, I think that debate's becoming more focused. And I just, from an agriculture point of view, so how do I put this? We have McDonald's, Woolworths, all that, the fresh food people, Woolies, right? Why are they the fresh food people? They sell what we grow. Aren't we the fresh food people? Once again, they're using our image. Have a look at all the television ads. Dairy fellas, cockies on feedlots, hey, good on your Coles, good on your Woolies, you're doing a great job. So you're using our image to make them competitive in the marketplace against Woolies or against Coles or against Aldi or whatever.
You saw the banner behind you, Jock.
No, Sean. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that, because they know very well that we've got the image that they can use to sell it. That's not being derogatory. That's what's happening, right? So we should be proud of the fact that they see real value in who we are.
Exactly.
We should be proud of that. and get out there and say, we are more than happy for you to use our brand, but let us be in control of how you're going to use it.
Well, let's have a fair price.
I think a good negotiator would be able to use anything.
No, but I mean, it's exactly true. Let's work together with the world.
What we want to do, we want people to have confidence in, first of all, the product we're selling is milk, or it is beef, number one. And secondly, we're happy for you to use our image, for anyone to use our image, but let's have a discussion how that image is used. Let's make sure that it is actually a benefit to both parties. And as far as we're concerned, everything that we do is about producing the best product we possibly can, and we want to make sure that if you're going to use our image, it's going to be promoted as such. It's going to get into the market on a domestic level. It's going to be that way. So you just have a look at the television ads. All the television ads have used an agricultural footage to actually sell their product, and it's amazing. Nobody spoke to us about it, but it gets used.
Just one looming issue, particularly for the beef industry, is the appropriation of the brand clean. And clean meat, and George has just been good at sending the appropriation of the clean meat image by synthetic meat. So, you know, synthetic meat's going to be important into the future. I think it's going to be a valuable part of what we have as a society. But the appropriation of the clean image is really problematic. And I think we probably need to address that very, very early, but that's going to have to be an issue for MLA and for others to really jump on. But if you're an AWI, you know, sending messages across to MLA at this point, I think is incredibly important, because this will move very quickly if we don't reappropriate the brand of clean.
We've got to protect the things that are important. So what we have sold is our clean green image around the world. The number of places that I went to when I was in NFF talking about on trade negotiations, it was all about, we want your product because it's clean and green and we can trust it, right? So I went over to China at one stage. You're not going to do anything with this. What's this thing?
It's Facebooking live.
Is it?
Yeah.
I know, well, I'll be a bit more cautious than you, that's the case. You bullshitting me or what?
No.
Right, well, I think I'll forget that line. As an industry, what are the things that allow us to get into an international market and sell our product in a very competitive space? Very competitive space. We've got every other country around the world that wants to step into our market and take our market share. And the reason we can do that is because we can sell a premium product with confidence, with traceability, and be able to do it. And it's recognised as being clean, safe, green, all of those things put together. Now, the comment around synthetic meat straight away is wrong, because it's not meat. And that's the point. So what we as an industry should be doing is saying, we don't have trademark over it, but by gee, we have a moral right over it. So you want to use the term meat, you prove to me it's meat. And have a discussion. It gets back to in the community. How do we actually have a discussion in the community and sit down and say, meat comes from? This is a discussion we have with children. Where does milk come from? That's exactly right. It's a bit hard to explain on radio when you're trying to tell them why you want milk, but that's where it comes from. So why all of a sudden does anybody else have the right to come in and utilise that term? And so meat, where does meat come from? Meat comes from a multiple of protein sources produced out of the thing. It doesn't come out of a test tube or out of some other system. So you can call it whatever you like. It can be clean, you can sell it whatever you want. But don't use the term that's actually used to drive it. So that's why I think we need to have a think about it. I think the industry need to sit down and say, right, how are we actually really going to address this? How are we going to do? What are we going to do to make sure that we can protect basically that trademark that we don't have, but it is something we sell our image on. And internationally, when I go in, well, used to go internationally, if I go over to the Japanese, for instance, and say, and they want to buy our product because it's clean and green, and we're going to sell meat, I'll be selling a meat, not synthetic stuff. And that's the reason they want it. They want it because it's a quality product, it's got a history about it, it's got traceability, it's safe, it's clean. And we don't want all of that work that we've developed over the history of agriculture production in Australia. We don't want that hijacked by somebody else come in and have a cheap shot simply by using the meat or milk or whatever it is. So this has got nothing to do with the Land and Water Commissioner. This is just Jock Laurie speaking, right? So Facebook, get that right. Yep.
Jock, isn't the issue basically with the state regulators in terms of truth in advertising? I mean, the only way that this can be cleaned up and say you can't call soy juice soy milk is to say, you know, you're defrauding the public or whatever. So it needs a legislative resolution, it seems to me.
Yeah, but you're never going to get a legislative resolution on any problem unless they realise it's a problem. And the first thing you have to do is show it's a problem, right? So nobody's challenged the fact before that coconut milk or bloody nut juice is a problem. Now it's being highlighted. And I think now that synthetic meat's coming around, people are starting to think, gee, what do we do? So now, I would think now would be the time to really step into it. And if you step into it and you actually create a debate, you can then create an argument as to why you think you should be actually addressing those issues. But it's really hard to get the legislators to turn around and put legislation in place if they don't see it as being a major problem. And so you need to actually show them why it's a major problem. So my view is that from an agriculture point of view, we're in a really competitive market domestically and internationally. Really competitive market. Every country around the world that exports beef and milk and whatever, they want to compete against us. They hate our clean green image because it gives us that advantage in those markets. Yet we're not prepared to really protect that as much as we should be protecting it, I think. So first thing we need to do is open the discussion, have the discussion, be sensible and rational, show why it's not fair, show why it's not reasonable, and that be clear about the terminology. Right? So if we don't raise it, we don't have any chance of getting it sorted. So I just thought I'd raise that one with you just as a matter of interest. I don't know whether anyone's interested or not, but
It's very important. What you said is very important, and farmers really need to understand that and believe that. The Dairy Connect's been doing a great job telling everyone that we just, yeah.
Well, the reason I wanted to raise it is because Dairy Connect, I mean, I've had plenty of discussions with Sean about this. Dairy Connect, I think, have been pushing it hard. I think the dairy industry needs to really protect it. I mean, you've got enough competition in the marketplace now. You've got enough issues in the marketplace now without being in a position where you're continually challenging against all these new products that are coming in calling themselves milk. I mean, even if you raise the debate enough that these new products come in and have to call themselves a different name, then at least that's a good start.
Exactly.
But you've got to sit down and be able to raise that, because if you don't, I've said this time and time again, if the agricultural industry does not get out there and support and look after itself, who will? Who will? There is nobody out there in the community that is going to stand up for agriculture and what we do if we're not prepared to do it ourselves. And so I think it's a pretty simple message.
Take a question.
Yeah, as we go, I'm just happy to have a yarn about anything.
Yeah, there you go.
There's not much structure to this, Adrian.
That's all right, it's all right. I'm not like that. We did have a discussion yesterday about the drought issue, and I've been putting a bit of thought in. Some of our discussion was, for example, the dairy farmers have had to compete with the bio-bale scenario, so they've actually gone and baled. A farmer may have had an opportunity to bale silage or hay off a 5 acre block that a hobby farmer owned. Well, bale hay people come and style our market. So let's just move on from that for a minute. My suggestion and my thinking on the issue is that it needs to be measurable and it needs to be predictable. So most farmers, if they think about their business, and this goes back to almost the Graham's GST story, if they can measure what they produce, right, then they can get pretty accurate, probably get 95% accurate on that. And then it needs to be predictable. So predictable is a little bit harder, but for the average farmer, you should be able to predict a drought that lasts 12 months, you would need such and such put away and such infrastructure. If that predictable portion that had, say, an 80% accuracy on it, surely you come up with a drought support scheme that made farmers go through a business process where they were measurable and predictable. You're just purely numbers, mate. So, and take away the unforeseen consequences of having bio-bale type schemes, which is, I know they're good intentions, they don't take them the wrong way. I just think you just need to have a little bit of a different think about it. Yeah, and if they predict out what they would be, most farmers should be able to get pretty close to that.
I think that's right. I think when the EC stuff was pulled down years ago, and you sit down and talk to a whole lot of farmers that didn't get any assistance at all, they all got through the drought without there being a problem. They didn't like it. It bloody hurt them, and they burnt some money up. But it was within the realms of they were talking about. They knew that they could do it. So their predictability, their budgeting, all that sort of stuff was pretty good. They got through. And so the industry once again, I think the biggest issue that I've found in all of my time is that a lot of the issues are created by ourselves, not necessarily created by anybody else. Or they're created by a sector of our community and not necessarily created by everybody else. So we'll have some people say, oh, the drought's bloody terrible, it's send me break, blah, 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 whatever it is. Yet there's a whole heap of other people that have managed through that process. As I say, they didn't enjoy it, but they managed through the process. And so what you hear is that then you get the response, and the response is all of these agencies coming in, or voluntary agencies coming in and support. All of that's great, but is it representative of the majority of the industry? I don't think so. I think the majority of the industry manage themselves pretty well, but once again, nobody knows that we do that. So when you get into a drought, you hear about all the people that are really struggling, but you don't hear about all the people that have actually done a tremendous job, got through, survived pretty well, burnt up a fair few bucks, but came out the other end because they planned well. And so it's always been a problem in the agricultural industry that we don't, from a media point of view, we've always struggled to get the good news stories out there. We get all the bad news stories. You go to the front page of a lot of the papers over the last 6 months about some coggy that's on the verge of a breakdown. Well, I mean, there's plenty of people in society that are on the verge of a breakdown because of the stresses that happen in life. Farmers are no different. We come under the same pressures, and we come under more intense scrutiny when there's a drought because it actually looks good. I mean, one of the things that's worried me more than anything is, once again, that I don't like the way we've actually had. I've got to be really careful with that thing. I don't like the way. I don't like the way the drought has actually been used by people to promote themselves and their image and their programs and all of that, right? So if in a lot of cases these people were very genuine, they wouldn't have to go out and promote the work they were doing it because they were doing it for the right reasons. So if you want to go out and help people who are in trouble, why do you need to go out and promote yourself? Why does it need to be on television all over the place about every dollar you're raising? In actual fact, it should be something you're doing because you generally want to go out and help people and deal with it. So I'd like to think that that once again the industry, the adverse times in the industry weren't used for managing and dealing with some other issues. So you've got all of those charity organisations out there. The argument in many cases is not only people who are now having to compete with them in the marketplace, but the second part of that is that a lot of those small towns that actually need the business going through their shops, they're losing business, and I'm hearing regularly they're losing business simply because of the hampers and things were all great, but in actual fact, I heard only this morning that there's one town didn't sell a bag of dog biscuits for about 2 or 3 months because that all been donated into the town. So there's a whole range of things that I think need to be thought about and addressed. And the communities in my town, which is purely agriculture, you fellas are a bit the same. You get back out some of the towns that have got a resource base, a bit of an economic base, they're different. But the purely agricultural towns, they rely on us to make a living. Those businesses, and most of the businesses in small towns are only surviving. They're not making a lot of money. They're only surviving and start keeping their doors open because they like to get out of the house and go and do something else. So I think the broader picture on the drought stuff is pretty big.
Jock, another thing that we talked about yesterday was, and something on the coast, the moment we hear of drought, the subsidies come out, the gouging that goes on within the industry. So freight, as I used an example, we were bringing freight in, wheat in at $3.27 a k, and sending hay out at $5.50 because they were getting a subsidy. To me, that's something that government needs to stand on.
Well, that's why Derek Scone's been put in place to deal with exactly that. And so if they can find evidence of where that's happening, I think the minister's more than happy to address that. The last thing that they want to do is see any subsidies going in and then the system being rorted. So everybody through the chain should be able to make their equal profit, but not actually turn around and take the profit from the subsidy. So if you've got evidence of that, I know Derek Scone will be more than keen to.
Happy to talk to me, Derek. Good.
Well, Terry, sometimes we've got to have a think about our relationships over time and see how we go.
Jock, I'm interested in you as chairman of the Intensive Livestock Committee and the opportunities that committee's been looking at, particularly in relation to right to farm. It's an important issue in terms of the dairy industry, in terms of it as it contracts, but also the problems it's encountering with city folk coming up into areas knowing full well it's agricultural land, yet complaining as soon as they get the first whiff of a smell. Could you give us a bit of an idea about where the committee is heading and what it intends to try to do to provide further guidance?
Yeah, look, I think the example I used before at Cow was that wasn't about people getting the first smell. That was about people in the agricultural industry not necessarily liking somebody setting up beside them, right? Now, you can take that debate back to agriculture versus the resource sector, or agriculture versus housing, or agriculture versus anything else. There's a whole range of things. So one of the things we're doing in that committee at the moment is we're doing a bit of a case study on the chicken meat industry and having a look at certainly the Sydney Basin, having a look at the value of agriculture in the Sydney Basin as it stands at the moment, and doing a bit of a case study on the chicken industry. So as I said before, we've got a processing facility, we've got all the supply sheds around it. As these are getting squeezed out, what does that actually mean? What does it mean to jobs? What does it mean to things? So we're trying to pull that work together, and then we'll go from there. We'll go and I'll go and have a yarn with the minister. I don't know whether these things are happening deliberately or whether they're just happening. I'm not sure whether they're aware of the problem or whether governments are happy with how the transition's happening. You know, so you've got the dairy industry that's out of the Sydney Basin that's moving out and gone. You've got the poultry meat industry that's sitting there at the moment, and as the grower sheds get squeezed out, I think they reckon there's a limit to about 150 to 200 k's transport, and once you go beyond that, it doesn't become viable for them. So if they get shifted out and go out of the Sydney Basin, then all of a sudden they've got to find another processor. That puts the processing facility under pressure and all the transporters and everything. So there's a huge amount of stuff. So we're trying to do some work to really get a good understanding. It's one of those issues, if you don't do the work, you don't know. So we're doing some of that economic analysis at the moment to try and figure out, and that would relate then across agriculture more broadly. Looking at, when you've got housing developments, buffer distances and what buffer distances actually mean, but in the end, is the buffer distance big enough or not big enough? And I don't think anybody really knows how big a buffer distance should be to give protection to agriculture. Looking at councils when they come to doing some of this work, approving some of these developments, trying to make sure that they understand that there is existing agriculture there, and what sort of notification they can put on forms through purchase, so that they knew there was agriculture there, they knew that they were going to be exposed to some of the normal agricultural practices and noises, and whether that was a thing that could move forward or not. So I don't, whether we're going to get anything out of it, I don't know, but what we'll do is we'll keep pushing down that path to see, first of all, identifying and resolve any issues that we can. Just on a couple of things, Sean, just to keep going. Last time I spoke to you fellas around energy, and I know you're having a bit of discussion around energy in a minute. I think the whole debate around energy, climate change, whatever you want to call it at the moment, is heading in a bit of a different direction. It's obviously become a very political issue, and so we're in a position as an agricultural industry, once again, where we need to seriously think about where we're going on this debate, right? So from an on-farm basis, you blokes probably use more energy than most industries, but when you go to the processing sector, which is all part of your supply chain, it's got to be efficient, and if it's not efficient, it's a problem. In my industry, we go from there, we go to the abattoirs, and the enormous expense of transport, processing in the abattoirs, chiller room, and then away we go. So just from my point of view, I sit down and hear the debate right out what we need to do. If we go to 50% renewables or 25 or 100, it doesn't matter what it is. The debate we're having at the moment is not necessarily about what our energy requirements are. And our energy requirements are what we need through the day, but the baseload power we need of a night time, right? And so we can have all the wind and all the solar, we could produce 100% of our daytime power, and when the wind's blowing, that's great. But we can't turn the chillers off of a night time in our processing facilities. So we need to have baseload power. What worries me is that we're getting the gradual decline in the production of baseload power in Australia. We're getting more and more pressure on coal mines. We're getting more and more people not wanting to invest in coal-fired production. We don't have a development of a gas industry, so we're not getting a lot of gas production now. So then I think to myself, well, where are we getting the baseload power from? Where's it actually going to come from to maintain that demand and supply that demand through the night time? And, battery storage facilities simply aren't around at the moment. I think the best guess is that 10 years down the track they might have something that's got a general thing. I think the one they put into South Australia feeds 30,000 homes for 5 minutes or 6 minutes or something. So, I'm not sure. But from an agriculture point of view, I sit down and think, well, where are we going? Now, I did an interview yesterday on this, so I got asked a question around climate change, and I'll give the same answer that I gave when I was the president of NFF. It's got nothing to do about the fact whether you believe or don't believe in climate change. You don't need to be shelved into a cupboard, yes you believe or no you don't believe. If you don't believe, and being the only industry leader in Canberra at the time that said we wouldn't support a carbon tax, and the reason we wouldn't support a carbon tax is when we went and got Mick Keogh to go through and do an individual analysis of all of the industries, including the dairy industry, it showed an incredible increase in cost of production on the way through that we couldn't pass on. So we weren't prepared to support that. It wasn't that I agreed or disagreed with climate change. As I said, I can line 10, I'm not a bloody scientist, I can line 10 scientists up against the wall and they've got different views, right? And you're asking me to make a decision as to which one's right. I wouldn't have a clue, I'm not a scientist. Right? I left school at 16, how the hell would I know anything? So when you've got that view, and then you've got something that's going to be imposed on the industry, you need to have a think about how you're going to absorb that. So just say carbon tax comes back on you fellas at 10% or whatever it is. Stick that into your costs, overlay that on your costs now, and tell me you think you're having a bit of problem now, but you just got another 10% whacked on top of it. So I don't know how you do it, but what I do know is that if we keep going down the path where nobody wants to invest in delivering baseload power, as industries that are the biggest energy user probably of all the industries in the country, what are we going to do? Where are we going to get our power from? How are we going to keep the cost of production down in our processing facilities, transport facilities, the power we use on farm? We can do it by solar and wind when it's there, but how are we going to do it the rest of the time? And so from your point of view, I think we really need to have a serious think about once again about how we're going to address that, because if we don't address it, before you know the debate's gone, and nobody will invest in some of these things that produce baseload power. So what do you do?
I might just make a quick comment on that, Jock. It just strikes me that the real problem has been lack of certainty. And if we'd actually stayed with the original emissions trading scheme that Labor had in 2007, we'd be a bloody sight better off now. And so what we actually have to have is certainty.
I'd agree with that. I'd agree with that, Bill. I think the only problem that we had with the carbon tax at the time was that there was one industry sector that was going to cop the cost. So when they sit down and say to me, we're going to put a carbon tax across the board, I said, that's fine. And as I said, now, our industry, I'm going to go through and do some reports on all the industry to figure out how much it's going to cost, show it to them, and they said, just pass that cost on. I said, you've got no idea how the industry works. We don't pass the cost on. So was I going to sit there and allow that to happen? No, I had to stand up and say no, I wasn't going to allow that to happen. So the broader debate now is we need certainty. We need certainty for people to invest in producing baseload power, but we need to understand, and the community need to understand, we need baseload power. How are we actually going to generate power to provide to these things? So you don't need to be a skeptic, you don't need to do whatever. What we need to do is identify that, figure out what R&D needs to be done to make things more efficient, go down the path, and if they deliver a dual outcome, which is economically sound for us, but reduces carbon emissions, that's great. Isn't that great? But we need to be focusing on that and driving some of that stuff, and then having a think about how we actually get power and have power generated from that baseload thing. I know they keep saying to me there's no need for baseload power, but I'm buggered if I know how these processing facilities are going to go without being able to extract power overnight. I can't figure out how they're going to do it.
Jock, can I drag you away from high level and really thoughtful stuff to a smaller thing? With the drought down around Finley, we've got a real anomaly in accessing water around. People, for example, that have saved water around the world, they're able to sell the water on the open market. They can trade it, but they can't use it. but then they've got to buy back, using those funds they've generated, water out of the Murray system, which then they can use, except that the water out of the Murray system costs them 3 times the amount per unit that they've just sold. Is there a way through this? I mean, you know, the answer coming back from the bureaucrats is, oh, they'll deplete the aquifer, or, you know, what evidence is there for that? None. It's not going to happen, they're not going to deplete that aquifer. So we've got a number of anomalies down there. I know Ruth's got another one. How do we break through the bureaucrats on some of this? Because, you know, if you look at that situation, just say those people sell that 3 units of water, it doesn't matter what it is, but they sell the 3 units of water, then they buy back an additional unit of water. They've actually used 33% more water than they were allocated in the first place.
So who are they
we're not net saving water.
Who are they selling the 3 units to?
They'll be selling it to other people with ball license who are able to afford it.
And they'll use it.
Yeah. I mean, you can't deplete the aquifer that way. I mean, it's just clearly quite an anomalous situation. How do we break through that?
To answer, there's one thing I do. I get quite a bit of this stuff on different areas. What I need to do is just get it in writing so I can understand it. I can then stick it in people's face and get them to explain it to me. Not necessarily explain it to me, but what I find, and I've just got one last night, exactly this issue, and another one this morning, where people come across these exact things in different systems around, and they just say, you know, this is it, they have a look at it and they say this all seems a bit wacky. So the first thing I do is I then send it in to the bureaucrats and say, just explain this to me. I don't understand how this can happen. And so, you know, I think one response I got yesterday was, I've got a headache having a look at it. So I think some of the historical stuff that's there, certainly people when they're looking at it, it challenges to why those decisions were made. So we just need to get it in writing and then be able to sit down and take a bit of time and have a look at it. So if you could do that, that'd be good.
So can I just add to that, like in 2006 we had our bore water licences reduced because the science said that we had to were overusing aquifer. Since then the science has shown that the science was wrong, and that in Victoria they've returned all the water to the farmers. In New South Wales we haven't had any water returned. We received no compensation for the, we went from 1,300 megs down to 200. We received no compensation, we haven't got that water back. So we're giving a free kick to the Victorians, and we're stuck with, there's no water tradable now because nobody wants to sell it, there's nothing available and we can't use it.
So the Victorians get all their water back?
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So does that mean that the system's now sustainable, but they've got all their water and you haven't got yours?
Yes. Yes.
So if you got yours back, would that deplete it or not?
Well, it shouldn't do, because most of us are using it as a drought backup. And that's the only time we use it, because it is a bit salty, and so we don't want to use it all the time.
Yeah. I know certainly when they went through and they did a lot of those reductions across all with groundwater and surface water and everything, there was a fair bit of pain felt all the way through. So happy again, if you could just jot it down and send it to Sean, he'll forward it on to me and I'll follow it up for you.
That water would be really, really handy just to know.
Yeah, no, yeah, I'm sure it would. I'll have a look. I'm not sure what the government's position on some of that stuff, but some of those historical decisions that have been made, as far as changing them, take a fair bit of unwinding. And I think as far as understanding them, I think because there's been different levels, different stages of the bureaucracy going all the way through the decision-making process, it takes a little while just to find out exactly where it's all up to. Well, just one more thing I might mention, Sean, just before we go. I'm not going to stay on a later plane anyway, but I mentioned talking a little bit earlier on about markets. One of the really important things from an agricultural industry point of view is to continue to be actively involved in the space of international markets. Right? It's interesting because when we had, if you go back into all the countries around the world, a lot of the countries around the world are all subsidised at different levels. And I remember going over to Europe. They wanted me to go over there, and we sat down in the European Parliament, spoke to about 10 or a dozen politicians, and I went in. I said, "What's our message?" And our message is we've got to remove the Common Agriculture Policy. So I went in there and spoke to the first one, and they basically told me to go to buggery. It was nothing to do with Australia. So I walked out and I said, "Now let me get this right. We're a country of 26 million people. I think there's about 240 million over here in the European Parliament, and we think we're going to walk in here and tell them to remove their Common Agriculture Policy and they'll just do it." And I said, "Well, that's bullshit. Give me something that we can actually win." The things that we could win are, we need to be able to get access into the markets. So what are the things that are actually stopping us get access into the markets? Because in the end, if I go to sell a pen of cattle, I want 10 people lining up on the rail and not one. So I want as much competition in the marketplace as I can possibly get. Now that, as far as I'm concerned, that goes exactly the same with milk products and everything. You're in a big international market, you've got big domestic demand. The interesting thing about the beef industry is that our domestic fellas need to be basically paying what the international fellas are paying, otherwise they don't get the product. And so we can apply pressure within the system. From milk's point of view, how do you actually get out there and create real pressure for your product and make sure you get it? And I understand all the discussions you're having around processing and all that sort of thing, but having said that, it's about getting more people, more demand, and driving the demand. So I would encourage you to continue to get involved in all the international negotiations that go on when it comes to marketing, because it is really important that you can knock down every barrier in every market you possibly can to create demand for whatever product it is in Australia, agricultural product that is in Australia. And once again, if we don't do it as an industry ourselves through the NFF and others, nobody else is out there. We are getting competition from every other country trying to get access into our markets. And they'll try and find anything they possibly can to discredit the image, the clean green image we have. They'll try and find anything. Not that international trade's nasty, but the fact is that there's a huge amount of money in this. And from an agriculture point of view, every commodity we produce, we want to create as much demand as we can. We want as many buyers as there are as we can. So I'd encourage you to get involved and continue to get involved in all of those things, and applying pressure to the government and identifying the areas that you can actually step into. I think it's ADF actually sit on the NFF table, and they're involved when I was there and actively involved in all that space. But you fellas are involved in the dairy industry. It's really important that you also understand how important it is for the industry to be able to create competition for the market. So I just leave that with you. Good on you.
Covered a lot of ground there, and really appreciate you making time to come and talk to us. I was particularly taken with your comments about agricultural promotion for dairy, protecting the brand dairy, brand milk. So we'd like you to continue your charge there and follow us and wear this with pride and protect our dairy.
Thank you very much. As you can see, I've had my fair share of milk in time. It's done me a lot of good. Thank you.